Welcome to the Farmer Tomcast. And today we have legendary hemp advocate, Anndrea Hermann. How's it going, Anndrea?
Doing very well up here in Manitoba. We're having a nice little heat wave and waiting for the workday to be over so I can go out and go swimming in the pond.
Oh, sounds lovely. So, the world wants to hear your story. And can you tell us where you got started and what you've been doing in the hemp industry?
Yeah, well, Tom, great to see you here and to be your friend and be called upon and to be part of your show. So this is great. So thanks so much. I love to be able to share my story and inspire others. Of course, when I started, it was very few of us. And now we've come to a nice groundswell. So there's so many more people involved than what it was originally. Sometimes we were lone woofers out there in the beginning. Not in the concept of woofers of the worldwide organization of workers on organic farms kind of scenario, which is a great program too for you all out there, encouraging people to come and stay at your places and help look that up. But yeah, my name's Anndrea Hermann. I'm originally from Joplin, Missouri. And I first became introduced to cannabis on the marijuana side of things, and then quickly learned that it wasn't only about marijuana. There was this hemp side of the cannabis plant, and that really rung inside of me and like sparked a passion. Yeah, I love my MMJ, but the hemp really said, this is something that's surrounding life work quite early on. So that was my first introduction to cannabis, and then my first intro to hemp. And then I learned in the state of Missouri that we had this like famous battle of the hemp bales, which is a really interesting story. And if you can ever make it to Lexington, Missouri, there's a really great museum there surrounding what they did and how they wet these hemp bales and like rolled them in front of them to, prevent the gunshots from coming through. And if you've ever had a hemp bale in front of you and you can imagine it wet, that's heavy and there's nothing going to penetrate that. And considering back then, this wasn't a manual hemp bale like we have today. So these were definitely stooped in different ways. So yeah, so from that, started writing papers on when I was in high school and really became part of when I got into university, I had an English professor that called and he told us, let's write down your final vocabulary. And these were the words that you as a person read between the lines of life and literature. And this was focused on literature. So I put hemp down as one of my final vocabulary, and he questioned, he says, well, how could this be? And so we were reading some Mark Twain, and it came upon talking about retting. They didn't necessarily say hemp, but they talked about retting bast fiber and retting the stalk. And it in the time frame and the location, it just tied right in. And he never saw this in the book. It never came out reading between the lines of the book in the literature. And he actually did his master's on Mark Twain and went back and said, oh yeah, like in actuality in this location there was hemp there. So first starting to become like part of my final vocabulary that defined who I was and what I wanted out of life and how I wanted to go about doing that. So when I was in my undergrad, I was about 2 years in, and my professor, Jim Jackson, he said, you have to declare a major. It's time for you to declare a major. And I'm like, yeah, poli-sci, maybe. Biology, okay, yes. Chemistry, maybe not really. So I was very wishy-washy about what I wanted to do and which of the forms of academia I was going to go down. I had already taken, like a little bit of a gap before I went back to university after high school. I was living on my own and didn't really know and have the focus in any one of those subjects. So then Dennis Weaver came along. Dennis Weaver is an old famous movie star who also later in life became a huge environmentalist. And he keyed something called Ecolonomics. And he went to my university in Joplin when it was a junior college. So he came back there and said, hey, I want to launch this capstone course called Ecolonomics. And it's the study of biology, economics, political science, and sociology. And his theory was that all four of those realms of academia have to tie together to create sustainability. And he says it could be one or the other. So maybe it's political. And so there's been some sort of law that's been passed that makes you recycle. Maybe it's in the office and somebody says, oh, we should really recycle paper because I care about trees. Maybe it's economics. They can get a refund or tax rebate if they do some sort of recycling or greening. Maybe it's more of a social aspect where people just feel like, oh, this makes us feel better about ourselves, or social corporate responsibility. So it doesn't really matter which one of those start, they all start to tie into each other. So this is how this capstone course called Ecolonomics came on. So I started taking a few of those courses in this capstone. So my professor said, you got to declare major. I said, what am I going to do? And he says, well, I want to know what pisses you off. And that's how he put it to me. He says, I want to know what you get up in the morning and you're actually angry about, and you feel that some right needs to happen. Something's wrong and you need to right it. And I said, it's this hemp thing. And he says, well, there you go. Make it happen. So with those really encouraging words, and he had this 8-ball in his office. It was hilarious. I go and consult the 8-ball. I wasn't the only person who'd turn his 8-ball in his office, the little magic 8-ball. And so he said, we'll go do something about it. And so that day I went down and I started emailing what hemp companies I could find. And at this time in early 2000, 1999, there were very few that you could find. But I did find the Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers. So I sent him a message, very basic. My name is, I go to school at, I'm interested in information and contacts concerning an internship working with industrial hemp. My name is, here's my name, my phone number, here's my professor's name, phone number. I didn't really, and that was just one of maybe 3 or 4 that I ended up sending that day. I really didn't, I thought about it, but I just never thought something was going to really happen, I guess. And the next morning when I got back at school, because I didn't have a computer at home, I couldn't check at night. I got back to school and I went, and oh my goodness, I had an email from the Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers Co-op in Manitoba, Canada, saying, we can host you this summer. And so that was in 2000. And so I would have got my internship in 2001. So of course I run up to Dr. Jackson's office immediately. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to call. So we call. And the chairman of the Parkland Hemp Growers at the time, Joey Federoch, and his family, Sue Schlingerman, which was the office manager, called Joey and said, she told me that she had meditated and she had something come to her that was surrounding bluegrass music and some sort of folkiness to it. And so she said, for some reason, when she got to her office, she knew that my name and email tied in with her meditation of the night before about something that was going to happen, that was going to change something greatly. And yeah, so by the end of the morning, I'm coming to Canada to serve an internship working with the Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers in their breeding program. I'm getting the chills right now. It happened that fast. And I was living on my own. I owned my place. I had to think about what was going to happen. I ended up taking out a student loan to be able to cover my mortgage cost and my car payment. I got a small grant from the school. And with that, I switched. Then I was able to declare a major, which it actually turned out to be, this ties back into having to declare a major. It tied into being a bachelor's of general studies, but focusing on the Ecolonomics principles, which now you can actually get a bachelor's in. At this time, you couldn't, because it was just these capstone kind of thoughts that they were putting together as capstone courses to get this certificate. So I turned the philosophies of Ecolonomics into my major, which had to become writing intensive for me to do this, focusing on hemp. So anytime I was in a class, that's what I was to focus on. I was to focus any topic, any paper, any answers, it all had to focus in on hemp. So yeah, so that happened in 2000. In 2001, I came to Canada and worked in the research plots and breeder plots with the Parkland Hemp Growers, staying with the host family, which taught me a lot because this was a real life farm. And so, I got to learn how to drive equipment. I was from low income, HUD funded apartments. We didn't have money saved. I never thought about going to university. It wasn't something like, you're going to go to university, you're going to make great changes in the world. That really wasn't how I was brought up. And knowing oh yeah, no problem, I'm going to university. It's what's happening. So yeah, so I started coming, I came in the summer of 2001 with the Parkland hemp growers. And then that just kicked the door wide open for me. So now I was like one of the only persons stateside that had been in the hemp fields, that had an opportunity to work with plant breeders, was spending summers in the fields. And so I came in 2001. I returned in the summer of 2002 again, to do another internship. And of course, as people know who do internships, that's, they ain't paying you. You work hard, but you're not getting any pay for that efforts. The pay comes in the knowledge that you gain, and the information that's shared, and the cultural that's ends up sharing. So in 2002, when I came back, the plant breeder, Dr. Peter Dragla, which is now passed away, asked me, what I wanted to do with myself. And I said, I'd really love to go into plant breeding. And so he says, well, let's make it happen. And so that at that time, the Canadian government had some funding in place. We applied for the funding. I got the funding. I became a provincial nominee in the state of in the province of Manitoba, pardon me, in which is it underneath the Unique Skilled Workers Program. So basically, I applied in the fact that I had this skill now, because there really, a lot of the breeding program work that was happening at that time was done by the plant breeder and a few farmers. They didn't really have any technicians at that time. And so that's how I came in. So I had a huge support from the Parkland Crop Diversification Foundation, the Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers, the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance, and their members in really, helping me get to the point to where I could apply for my landed immigrancy. My host family was amazing in that, because I had to have people sign on and say like, oh, they'd watch out for me and everything of that sort, because they just don't want you coming here and then falling to the wayside, and then going on social welfare. So I was able to come back, and then I got my landed immigrancy, and that meant that I was moving to Canada. And during that time also, I had applied for the grant and got the grant, and was able to start my master's program at the University of Manitoba. And that turned out to be a master's program in hemp fiber agronomy. So in middle of all of this, I was able to meet then the industry leaders, Sean Crew at Hemp Oil Canada, which took me under his wing also, and became a mentor of mine. Ruth from Ruth Hemp Foods, Barbara Philippone from Enviro Textile. So all these people started coming and really mentoring me, and becoming my friends. And I was able to earn the position on the board of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance. I earned positions on the board of the Hemp Industries Associations in the US, started liaisoning with the European Industrial Hemp Association. So really facilitated me to get plugged right in to what was happening legislatively in Canada and the US, and how those fed in, and what was going on in Europe, and how those back fed in. So while I was doing my master's, I was also working at Hemp Oil Canada part-time. I worked at a little hemp store part-time. And in the summers, I was doing my research work in the fields, but I was also a licensed hemp sampler. And back then, at the time, you had to be, the hemp samplers here were third-party accredited persons that were authorized by Health Canada to go out and sample the field. So for some many years, I was told that I had walked more miles in the hemp fields than any other person known alive today. Maybe that's not the same today, because there's a lot going on out there. But yes, for the greater sum of 7 or 8 years, I was Canada's principal hemp sampler in the prairies, and I would sample hundreds and hundreds of fields every summer, which was fun and a logistical nightmare sometimes, because it was like, go down 1 mile, see a rock, then a tree, turn there, go up the hill, down by the gully, and then you'll see the hemp field. So, and this was really before we had the stellar GPSs on our phones and those things. So, my word of the wise is, if you ever are out in the field like this, a couple of things I always started carrying with me was a whistle, just in case, because you never knew if you were going to come along a moose. Mooses are very vicious animals. So you never knew what you were going to come along. I mean, maybe you could trip and hurt your leg or something, or get lost in the field, because I had that happen a couple of times. The field got over my head, and it's like you don't know which way is which. So thankfully I always made my way out, but those were sort of some of the key things that I would take with me, was that whistle. So that was always a fun journey for me in general, being able to go out and do that. And during all this time, I'm traveling to the trade shows, natural products shows, the association, the National Association shows, and really being able to start mentoring and paying it forward, which meant so much to me. And I would have people come up to me and be like, "Oh my gosh, Anndrea, thank you so much for what you've done." And I'm like, "Oh, what did I do?" And they're like, you paved the way. And so I really feel like agronomy wise, legislative wise, I was really able to help pave the way to where we're at today, and the sense of freedom. I mean, we're still fighting for our freedom. I think we've stepped away from the freedom fighting in a way, because we kind of got our way, but we still have so much activist and freedom fighting that needs to happen in the cannabis world in general, whether or not that be hemp side of cannabis or marijuana. By the way, Tom, I hate that they took the word marijuana away from us. I don't know when that happened. You know, like now it's like they want to call marijuana cannabis and hemp. I'm like, but cannabis is hemp and marijuana. So that's just a pet peeve of mine. I'm like, we fought for the right to free the word marijuana, and now they just want to call it cannabis. I don't know how it happened. I'm sticking to the marijuana days. But yeah.